Hello, this is Michael Jonah, and I'm going to share with you just a small segment of the January 25th, 2011 WEBBOT report. It is the most recent WEBBOT report, The Shape of Things to Come, and I am just going to read a couple paragraphs, okay? I would highly recommend that you go to Half Past Human, and you can purchase the entire report on their website. Um, I'm just going to read a couple paragraphs that have to do with, well, they've been already talking about the dollar death quite a bit in this report, but this is going to specifically get to destructive flooding events. And I know many of us have been really fixated and concerned about flooding events, so let's get into it. The detailed sets for the dollar death internal to the populous US of A show a wide variety of effects ranging from violence to stupefaction, disbelief. Of a curious note is that the data accretion patterns for these aspect attribute sets are showing that a calm period, what can also be described as the grasping time, will exist for several days after the initial crash of the dollar-built structure. The patterns show that the populous USA will have a bit of a freakout, then something of a holdfast as the national mood goes towards assessment. This shake it, bake it, and taste it period in which the populace will be dazed and confused. The accretion periods continuing thereafter with aspect attributes of return and homebound that are in support of the diaspora subset. The detailed layers are pointing towards something of a shock for the powers that were. Okay, that's a big one. In this report, they modified the powers that be to TPTW, the powers that were, to basically indicate their loss of control. So, officialdom, minions, as the populace decides to get a long home, wherever that may be. This general relocation is, from the point of view of the political minions and their masters, both unexpected and beyond control. The minion class subsets sum up to some rather high levels of anxiety and disruption to plans around this relocation of the masses. Note that a lot of the masses will be children returning from schools and other institutions. This subset is by one component in supporting the diaspora archetype growth in the populous US of A entity for 2011. With many of the social disorder subsets being fed by the death of the dollar, creating famine and food shortages, as well as destroyed stores, it would be easy to assume that the dollar would be the primary problem facing the populace of the USA. However, sadly, that is not to be the case. A hint arises from the sheer number of cross-links between the populace entity and the terra entity, that's the earth entity. The level of cross-links between the social disease and social order disruption in the populace entity and the destructive weather in the earth entity, terra entity, has never been this extreme. The populous entity provides descriptors for the impacts, while the terra entity contributes to descriptors of the causal events. Apparently, one of the most destructive events will be a series of floods. These floods are described as being food supplies impacting for several generations. There are repeated references to multiple flood centers, and each is also defined as a center for some form of crop production. The impact level for the flood archetype separated out to USA geographic references goes out 4 generations, or 84 years. The flood linguistic here has supporting sets that describe the sites as being never flood and first time ever, as well as speech in shock over the pictures. There are Several descriptor sets within the supporting aspect attribute groups that describe high dry hills that will be on video enfolding the flood. These hills are further described as scarred by the rain and deluge that sets up the flood conditions. The details include descriptors for boat rescues and lines of fleeing humans. These details paint a picture of long lines of humans fleeing up steep hills and chaining themselves together to overcome obstacles. The chains of fleeing people will also be in conjunction with the flight of animals of all kinds. Some of the flood descriptor sets also include support for earthquakes and earthquake damages that are also contributory to the impact levels of the floods. These earthquake sets are dwarfed by the terror entity earthquake sets, so that the entity needs to be taken into account. But there are nonetheless significant sets pointing to earthquakes that precipitate damages that in turn cause some flooding and exacerbate other floods already in place. Note that the floods within the populous US of A entity are also extensively cross-linked internally to the diaspora subset, as well as being also externally cross-linked to the global population entity, where the terminating sets also include diaspora. The flood subset includes aspect attributes for several communities in which critical infrastructure such as hospitals, fire stations, law enforcement buildings being swept away and encapsulated in mud. Some of these linguistic sets are reminiscent of the language we saw that allowed us to forecast the Katrina hurricane disaster. There are 4 sets located so far that have sums for impact damage levels that are higher than we had prior to Katrina. Not only do the descriptor sets contain the usual kind of disaster language, such as buildings collapsing, levees failing, but also there are sets that contain insanity-producing gas releases and toxic waste contamination, and contamination by fuel spills of magnitude. There are further descriptors which portray airports that are underwater and port facilities with only rooftops showing. These floods are also part of the soon-to-be-revealed plan. Note, details come out in documents liberated during spring rioting in the north of the country to depopulate certain parts of North America for unknown to us either reasons of the power that were. These areas are extensively cross-linked over to the global population entity where they terminate in sets, with predominantly Mexico and Gulf Central America geographic references. Thus, the interpretation is that the powers that were had a plan to shift or kill off the populace of a large portion of the Gulf of Mexico region for their own purposes. Parts of the diaspora descriptor sets within the populous US of A entity are pointing to a permanent form of relocation affecting the southern USA from Florida through Texas and eastern Mexico as a direct result of springtime events in the Gulf of Mexico region in 2011. Now this is all I'm going to read for you, okay? This report, I highly recommend that you go and purchase the report in its entirety. I think this is probably one of the most important reports that you can ever read. It will also confirm what many of us already know. This is an additional confirmation. Much of what they talk about we already know is set in motion via scalar, HARP, weather modification, geoengineering, what has already happened in the Gulf with the BP drilling into the crust, drilling into a mud volcano, okay, the suspected HARP manipulation, the tectonic manipulation of the New Madrid fault line area. We already have inklings of the fact that the mainstream media has already been hinting to the fact that there's, food problems. Inflation is possibly a problem in food pricing. So we are already beginning to see what this report is discussing manifest I highly recommend. The report isn't that expensive. Go to Half Past Human. I wanted to share this short blip of this report, but out of respect for the creators of this report, and the fact that it is a copyrighted material, I did not want to really discuss any more of this report. Okay? Take care, and get your preps in order. And we all know that hyperinflation, the death of the dollar, is all real events that are occurring. We know the powers that be, or should we say the powers that were. Okay, we know they can't be trusted. We know the mainstream media can't be trusted. So this report is a confirmation of everything that you probably already know, but it is probably one of the most interesting documents that you can ever read. Take care, and have a good day.